Good morning. Seeing people with nice backgrounds behind them. So we're going to begin our class, as always, with some practical meditation. And in doing so, indirectly, we're taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. A little more explicitly, we're because I mentioned actually for the benefit of sentient beings that we're doing this, we're generating bodhicitta. Usually those are the two prerequisites when you begin some kind of practice. Taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha distinguishes you from non-Buddhists, and generating bodhicitta, generating the mind aspiring for enlightenment, differentiates you from the practitioners of lower scope who are aiming simply to escape from cyclic existence for themselves. So sit comfortably, watch your breathing, your respiration. Once you've recognized it, you can place your mindfulness on it, relaxing your body and mind. And without multitasking on other thoughts, place all of your mindfulness on the respiration. With your mind a little bit calm down, try to place your attention now, instead of on the breathing, on the respiration, place it on the nature of the mental consciousness. Of course, the way to go about that is first to notice the mental consciousness and its contents before you center on its nature as being clear light, non-obstructing, just to notice the thoughts within it. Notice the space between the thoughts. trying to focus in such a way that you are constructively preventing conceptualizing thoughts from arising. Even when the thoughts are present, recognizing their presence is an indication, a sign that the mind is non-obstructing, has a clear light nature, conventional clear light nature. Letting go of input from your eyes, your body, your ears. Hopefully you're listening to the instructions, but not being distracted by other sounds, odors, tastes. Focusing on a sense of the clear light nature of the mind, like space, non-obstructing, within which you can quickly notice the appearance of other thoughts or emotions. This being the nature of our mind, the clear light nature of our mind, and among the clear light nature is a conventional clear light nature, also called the developmental Buddha nature. The ultimate clear light nature of our mind, the emptiness of our mind, is what's called the actual Buddha potential, Buddha nature. That we can, recognizing within this, that we can overcome our current faults, our attachments, our anger, our jealousy, our adherence to the here and now, our sense of importance of what we see and hear and taste and touch. Going beyond that, recognizing that we can escape from cyclic existence, we can achieve enlightenment, we can develop all the good qualities, eliminate all the faults. Why would we do that? Well, for ourselves, of course, but from a Mahayana point of view, it would be sufficient just to achieve liberation for one's own aim alone, lesser of one's own aim, but for the higher sense of one's own aim, to be free of all suffering, to have uninterrupted experience of great bliss, of the omniscient state, requires us to develop compassion for sentient beings, to be able to achieve that state. There's no way to achieve omniscience without having developed bodhicitta that recognizes all sentient beings as heartwarming, having been our mothers in numberless lives in the past, having been depthlessly kind during that time, even when they weren't mothers. Even strangers and enemies have been kind to us in giving us the opportunity to practice Dharma. With a sense of equality with them, that they are equal in wanting to be free of suffering, wanting to be happy. No reason for us to work only for our own benefit. Once we've understood, had a little understanding of emptiness of the self, we can begin to impute self onto the entirety of sentient beings. Working to eliminate suffering and to bring about happiness of all living beings. That is our goal, to achieve enlightenment for that purpose. We're still a long ways from there. So to think, I have to understand the mind in a deeper way, because that's the laboratory within which all of these spiritual practices are initiated. They may be extended to body and speech, of course, but they're initiated by the mind, the laboratory of the mind. So to better understand that, with the aim of achieving enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings, I'm going to participate this morning on this further investigation of mind and mental factors. I'm going to listen, participate, meditate in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And then slowly bringing your attention back to the present. Seeing a couple of new names. Hi, Ida. And said hello to Stephen before. Diane and Kathy and Linda and iPhone Dawn. Morning. So before we begin, any questions? Any lingering doubts? Or wondering why you ended up here when you didn't expect to be here? Maybe some of the new people didn't expect. This is a class on mind and mental factors for Thupten Norbu Ling. We have quite an international crew here, from Hawaii to Canada to New Mexico to all over the place. No questions? Everyone okay? Okay, so a couple of new folks. I hope you have access to the text that we're dealing with here, composed by a great Tibetan Lama, guru, called Kanchen Yeshe Gelsen, and translated into English by C.G. So we finished talking about the difference between mind and mental factors. We have, then we mentioned that amongst mental factors in the Mahayana, especially in Asanga's text, the Abhidhamma Samuccaya, there's an enumeration of 51 mental factors, which is generally what we categorize. And the first of those, the divisions of those mental factors, we talk about like the 5 omnipresent mental factors, the 5 object ascertaining mental factors or determining mental factors. So it's 10. The 11 virtuous mental factors, the 6 root afflictions, or 6 root delusions, the 20 secondary afflictions, or 20 secondary delusions, you can call them if you want, and the 4 changeable mental factors. Those are that's the order in which they're being defined, given here. And of the 5 omnipresent mental factors, there was feeling, discrimination, sometimes called discernment, contact. Let's see intention, contact, and attention. So they don't have to be in this order. Sometimes you might even start with contact as the very first one rather than feeling, but we start with feeling, sorwa. And as we mentioned last time, the defining characteristic of feeling is the experience of pleasure, pain, or neutral feelings. And feeling itself is not something that's looking at those as though they were something else, like feeling is not like looking at suffering. Feeling is the experience of suffering, or the experience of pleasure, or the experience of something in between, which we could call neutral feeling. It has the characteristic of experience, and through the entity of experience, it experiences individually the fruitional results of virtuous and non-virtuous actions. So I mentioned last time that of the various kinds of results, we usually talk about 4 results of karma, right? The maturation result, here maybe you could call fruitional result, the environmental result, and then 2 results that are similar to the cause. One is similar to the cause as an experience, and one is similar to the cause as an action. You remember that? Okay, so some of you remember. Some people maybe have just heard that for the first time. So on page, just going back a little bit, on page 17, it says, here what is experienced by feeling is taught to be fruition or maturation. So usually when we talk about the maturation effect of karma, what's usually mentioned in the scriptures is rebirth in one of the realms. And maturation result or maturation effect is generally a result of negative or positive karma, that will throw you into the lower realms or the upper realms. But here we have the mysterious intermediate thing, something that's a result of neutral karma, which is not virtuous or non-virtuous, that brings about neutral feelings. So there's a little bit of confusion here. May have mentioned before. I wonder if anyone's was perplexed about that. Generally, the characteristics of a maturation result is that it is the result of negative or positive karma, right? That it is experienced within the continuum of a sentient being, and that it itself is not virtuous or non-virtuous. So the feelings themselves are not virtuous or non-virtuous, right? But it sort of leaves some doubt about how neutral feelings are a maturation result, because it's the maturation results have to be, according to the Abhidharma, have to be the result of virtue or non-virtue. So how neutral feeling can be a result of that is a little bit unaddressed. I talked to some of my spiritual friends about this, some who also talked to some geshes, and one of the thoughts is that neutral karma, like say for instance, when you are doing some actions creating karma, you are not in a virtuous state of mind, motivation, or a negative motivation, just in a neutral state. Those are like very impotent seeds that are incapable of giving rebirth in one of the realms, because there are only lower realms and upper realms, right? The lower realms are the result of being thrown into them. Full maturation result being thrown into the lower realms, or the upper realms is a result. Stephen, did you have a question? They're the result of strong actions that can impel you with all of the subsidiary factors and so forth, whereas the feelings, the neutral feelings, are like weak seeds. So anyway, this is something to think about. Maybe you can read some other things about that. So we talked about this statement in the Lanrim Chemo about the manner in which actions are definite. We spent some time on that. When we say that karma is definite, it doesn't mean that they will definitely ripen. It means that negative actions definitely bring suffering, and virtuous actions definitely bring happiness or pleasure. And the stanza from the Precious Garland, from non-virtue comes all sufferings, and likewise all bad migrations. From virtue comes all happy migrations, and the happiness within all rebirths. So I think it's just about here that we were the last time. Therefore, happiness and suffering neither arise without cause, just randomly, like people think, I had this accident, I got banged up. It was just causeless, it was just accidental or without cause. From a Buddhist perspective, there is nothing that we can experience, pleasure, pain, or indifference, which does not have a cause. And we are the ones who created that cause. The causes are not things that are unrelated to us, such as God. Here it's, it's a fundamental nature. In the Samkhya school, we talk about some fundamental nature, which is the cause of everything, or the theistic interpretation in the Vedas that there is a God, like the creator Ishvara, who is, and let's say in the Christian sense, maybe can bestow suffering upon people or so forth. From a Buddhist perspective, none of these are tenable. Rather, in general, happiness and suffering comes from virtuous and non-virtuous actions, respectively. And even the various instances of happiness and suffering arise individually without even the slightest mix-up. from the various instances of those types of actions, hence gaining certainty regarding this definiteness or infallibility of actions and their results is known as the correct view of all Buddhists. I mentioned in the tenets course also, sometimes is called the conventional right view. Usually the right view, when we talk about view, right view is, or correct view is considered the correct view of emptiness, right? So the conventional, that you could say that that's the ultimate correct view. The correct view of conventional correct view is that of karma. So it's dealing on a different plane. It's dealing on the conventional reality rather than ultimate reality, ultimate truth, right? Conventional correct view is praise is the foundation of all wholesome qualities. So we talked about generally feeling is of three types: pleasant, unpleasant, you could call suffering, or neutral. Okay. Then if you go into more detail, there's a quotation from a text by Vasubandhu called the Five Aggregates, where he says, what is feeling? It is the three types of experience: pleasant, unpleasant, and that which is neither pleasant or unpleasant. Here she's translated suffering, pleasant, suffering. Pleasant feeling is that which, when it ceases, you wish to meet it again, in case you have any doubt. That's how you can discriminate. Is there any kind of unpleasant feeling you'd like to have again? It says suffering or unpleasant feeling is that which, when arises, you wish to be separated from. Is there any unpleasant feeling? Well, depends on the aspiration of the person. Bodhisattvas sometimes even don't want to be separated from unpleasant feelings because they recognize it as burning up their negative karma. But the natural tendency of us is something that's pleasant is something you want to engage in. And therefore, it can impel attachment, certainly impel, bring about desire for the continuation of that. And if that desire is, mixed with some ego grasping, so it becomes attachment. So pleasant feelings give rise to attachment. Unpleasant feelings give rise to repulsion or anger. And so we can put the general category as angered repulsion, and neutral feelings give rise to neither wanting to be separated from, nor, to elongate that. Neutral feelings just sort of, it inculcates a kind of basic kind of ignorance. When these three types of feeling are differentiated in terms of the supports of the body and mind, there are six. So we talk about physical feelings and mental feelings. So the physical feelings or bodily feelings, she translates it here, bodily feelings. So physical physical pleasure, physical suffering, and physical neutral feelings. And then as opposed to that, the mental pleasant feelings, mental suffering, and mental neutral feelings. Of those, from a Buddhist perspective, what is more long-lasting are the mental reactions. Say, if you have a physical suffering, you will, as a result of that, sometimes feel some mental anguish, and there's a mental unhappiness. Let's say headache. When you have a headache, is that physical suffering or mental suffering? Lewis, what do you think? headache?
I would think that the onset of the headache might have a physical derivative to it, but the ongoing unpleasantness and suffering of the headache tends to become more mental as it goes on.
Yeah, that's what I think too. So they're related. You can obviously have mental suffering without physical suffering, right? What do you think? Ida, can you have mental suffering without physical suffering? Can you give an example? That's pretty simple. There you go.
Yes, you can. Worry.
Yeah, worry. Someone said some bad words to you. They didn't smile at you. You become unhappy. So there's some cases where they're connected, and then even mental suffering can induce physical symptoms sometimes. When you're really worried, you can end up with upset stomach and tension in the body and so forth. So there's a trade-off between the two, but they are separatable. Physical suffering or bodily suffering here, as it says, bodily feelings and mental feelings. So what's the difference between body and mental feelings, physical and mental feelings? Feelings that arise in the retinue of the five sense consciousnesses are called physical feelings or bodily feelings. So feelings that arise in the retinue of the mental consciousness are called mental feelings. So there's a doubt. So if that's the case, what's the reason for calling the feeling that arises in the retinue of an I consciousness body feeling? Because the word that's used in the in the Tibetan is lu. Lu means body generally. So usually we think of this as our body. When we talk about the different consciousnesses, we talk about eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body consciousness. So the word body is related separately to the other of the five senses, right? So there are five senses. Why is the feeling in I consciousness called body feeling? So response, famous statement in the 400 stanzas by Aryadeva that you'll find in many different contexts. It says, just as the body's sense faculty pervades the body, likewise ignorance abides in all. So what this is saying is that the body faculty through which you experience suffering, if you get stung by a bee, or you feel pleasure if you are embraced or something like that, that pervades all of the other senses. It even pervades the eye faculty and the ear faculty and the nose faculty. So because of that body faculty being pervaded there, these other faculties can be called physical, even though they're not physical body. That makes sense, right? I think we talked about that last time a little bit. Thus, any feeling arising in the retinue of the other four sense consciousnesses, such as I consciousness, is also called bodily or physical feeling. So the origin of that statement in Aryadeva is that similar to the body faculty pervading all the other faculties, ignorance pervades all of the other conscious activities. So they're all affected by it in the same way that body faculty affects all of the other faculties. Ignorance affects all of our other consciousnesses. If we have ignorance, if we're free of ignorance, of course, it doesn't affect them. So when these six feelings are differentiated into two, there are many ways of, so Stephen, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Venerable George. So I'm a little bit confused here.
Okay.
When we talk about the sense consciousnesses, they are non-conceptual.
Right.
So how does the, say, negative mental consciousness affect the sense consciousnesses in terms of making it virtuous or non-virtuous? Because isn't virtue or non-virtue, at least non-virtue, based on conceptuality?
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you think that your I consciousness can create negative karma? Doesn't it have?
No.
Well, we'll learn about as we're coming up in the amongst these five omnipresent mental factors. One of the mental factors is called intention, right? Intention is essentially that which creates karma. So does I consciousness create karma?
Well, I don't think it could create negative karma because it can't be non-virtuous since it is non-conceptual.
Yeah, I don't think it can create virtuous karma either. So as its mental factors are all neutral, it can create neutral karma, but eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, taste and tactile consciousness can't create karma, virtuous or non-virtuous karma. So if you think, you feel guilty about looking at a handsome man or beautiful woman or something like that, thinking, there is again that crossover. When you see something, your mental consciousness reacts to that, and desire can arise if it's something attractive. If it's anger or other mental factors can arise if it's something that's unattractive. So it's not as though your I consciousness is creating the karma. It's just providing the basic information for the mental consciousness. Does that sort of?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you, Venerable George.
Okay. So when the six feelings are differentiated in another way into two, there are called, here she translates materialistic and non-materialistic. So what? Well, let me say this first, and then give Shanka a chance. What's called here materialistic feelings in Tibetan is called Sangzin Dang Cheba. Sangzing. Sangzing has different meanings. Sangzing can mean like messed up when the hairs are all intertwined. There's zangzing, but it basic meaning from Sanskrit is amisha, which means what we like. I think in the Christian tradition we say fleshy, things of the flesh. Here she says materialistic. The word material doesn't come into either the Tibetan or the Sanskrit of this word. It's just the way that she's chosen to translate it here. So some feelings that are, like I said, feelings that are concomitant with the craving for contaminated, appropriated aggregates are called Sangzin Dang Chepa, are called materialistic or fleshy. You could call them venal also. I think in one of the great dictionaries, this big, huge, any of you have this dictionary? I have it the right way up. I have it upside down. Buddhism, Dictionary of Buddhism, Princeton Dictionary of Buddhism, Robert Buswell and Don Lopez. It's a huge, it's not something that you feel comfortable in sitting in the toilet with it on your lap. It's too heavy. So in there, they also talk about venal. Venal actually means sins that were done with expectation of getting something back. Venal sins, you know that, like from the Latin to sell, vendare or whatever. So here, the sense of amisha is kind of fleshy things of the flesh. You could say materialistic. So what do materialistic and non-materialistic mean? Feelings that are concomitant with, that bear similarities with craving for the contaminated, appropriated aggregates are called materialistic. Feelings that are concomitant with the exalted wisdom directly realizing selflessness are called non-materialistic. So I'm going to stop there for a second and ask Shanka, what's his doubt? Maybe it's from something we just talked about a minute ago.
Well, actually, I was following up on Stephen's question.
Right.
So the sentence consciousnesses don't create karma by themselves. So
they do create they create neutral karma.
Neutral karma. I'm sorry, it's positive, negative karma by themselves. So it's the feeling mental factor that is the one that is a cause for the karma. Is that correct? I mean, it's when I have dislike, or I mean, I'll have aversion, or if I have pleasure, or pleasure feeling, or aversion, well, not aversion, but unpleasant feeling, so forth and so on. So that's what causes the. Is that correct, or is that still not correct? Because that's still. That mental factor is still associated with the eye consciousness, right? Or sense consciousness.
So you can have, eye and ear are a little more difficult to experience the pleasure or suffering in them. You might think that you hear pleasant words. That's not called ear pleasure. That's mental reaction to that. Pleasure of the ear or eye are more subtle to experience. But when you talk about of the nose, tongue, and especially body. For instance, pleasure of the body, sexual pleasure, unpleasant feeling when you've been scratched or bitten or something like that, beaten. That indeed, you don't need to have only the mental feeling first, that the mind reacts to that physical feeling and reacts. If it's unpleasant feeling, if you've been punched, your mind can develop all sorts of responses to that. So is that what you're talking about? That when the feeling in the eye consciousness, like say pleasant feeling of eye consciousness, it's not, say for instance, if you look at a picture of painted by a famous artist, beautiful scene, does that create pleasure in the eye consciousness?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't think so. Right.
So someone who's not educated and doesn't appreciate art, they just look at that as nothing special, right? That's a mental response. Pleasure of eye consciousness, if you see something which is discordant, that causes your eye consciousness to feel uncomfortable, maybe bright flashing light or something like that might bring about an eye feeling.
Well, I mean, I think oh, sorry, go ahead.
Ear consciousness, the example I gave is a classic example of
that's what I was thinking.
Scratching the blackboard with your fingernails, some kind of screeching sound or something like that can cause some unpleasant feeling in ear consciousness. But the nose, when you can, if you smell something attractive, perfume or the odor of delicious food or something like that, that can induce that itself is a noticeable pleasure, or if you smell excrement or something off, you come in the room, like on TV when the mother comes in the room of her son, who's got his socks thrown all over the room. You've seen these ads for the deodorant, the thing you plug in the wall to get rid of the odors. It's obviously an unpleasant feeling of the nose consciousness. The body is the most gross. Okay, Shankar?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So when we talk about materialistic and non-materialistic, this is just her choice of the word. Sangzing doesn't mean materialistic. Amisha doesn't mean, it's more having to do with of the flesh, like in the Christian tradition, sins of the flesh or something like that. Or, even if you engage in virtue without the realization of emptiness, that's still this kind of materialistic, as she calls it, or fleshy. So what do materialistic and non-materialistic mean? Feelings that are concomitant with the craving for the contaminated, appropriated aggregates are called materialistic feelings. What does that mean? Contaminated, appropriated aggregates. I'm going to ask, well, okay, so Lewis is volunteering.
I was going to say any object ascertained by the mind any object ascertained by a contaminated mind, or any object ascertained by a non-enlightened mind will by necessity be contaminated by ignorance.
Okay, contaminated is okay. Now, but I just wanted to offer, for those who haven't heard these terms before, appropriated aggregates. Appropriated aggregates. What does that mean?
That means that an object that you've had contact with and that you focused in on and you brought your retinue of mental factors into play?
No. Doris.
That's when we appropriate this body. When the consciousness enters the fertilized egg, I think.
Right.
Is that appropriate?
Right. So generally, when we talk about the word appropriation here, Nerlen Gipumbo, means that are closely taken. That means that, say, for instance, the being in the Bardo state, the intermediate state, enters into a fertilized egg, then those gross aggregates that are existing then in the embryo or in that, whatever that's called then, zygote or whatever, those are called appropriated aggregates. And so we have now aggregates which were appropriated, that were grasped, and that's what we have now, the continuum of those, right? Our body and our gross minds and so forth are the appropriated aggregates. Contaminated appropriated aggregates. So craving for the contaminated appropriated aggregates, say feelings that are concomitant, that share similarities with craving. Craving means strong desire bordering on attachment. For the contaminated appropriated aggregates are called materialistic feelings. So that means when you have a body and mind that are still contaminated, as Lewis said, with grasping to true existence. Well, even right now, even if I were to realize emptiness right now in a meditative equipoise, I have a direct realization of emptiness. Do I not still have contaminated, appropriated physical aggregates?
Yes.
Yeah. So feelings that are concomitant with the exalted wisdom directly realizing selflessness are called non-materialistic feelings. So at that case, in that situation, if you're directly realizing selflessness or emptiness, if you're directly realizing that, you are not paying attention to any of the input from your body, your other material senses, physical senses, right? It's just the mental sense.
So Venerable?
Yeah.
So during meditative equipoise, then, that this is what comes into play, right? Non-materialistic feelings. But if you arise from meditative equipoise, then you're back to having contaminated, craving for contaminated appropriated aggregates.
Yeah.
I mean, until you are at the 10th level, of course. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So in meditative equipoise, on emptiness, what kind of feelings would you have? What do you think? Christine, what do you think? Would you have pleasurable or unpleasurable mental feelings?
No, you would, no, you wouldn't have any of that.
What do you think? Nadine, what do you think? Could you have pleasurable feelings in meditative equipoise on it? So it says here, feelings that are concomitant, that are in the retinue of the exalted wisdom, the gnosis, directly realizing selflessness, are called non-materialistic feelings. Could those feelings be pleasurable? Nadine, what do you think?
I don't know, but I think yes.
Putting you on the spot. Sorry, I'm going.
I don't know, but I think so. Yes, I think it must be pleasurable to realize emptiness.
Christine, what do you think?
Well, I think we would be blissful.
Well, is it so bliss? So this word, which sometimes we say bliss, is still pleasure, right?
Okay.
So is it, so that, would that be pleasurable mental feeling? I don't know. Have to think about that. So feelings that are, so when it says feelings that are concomitant with the exalted wisdom directly realizing selflessness are called non-materialistic feelings. If you talk about with direct realization of selflessness, it's hard to see, that there would be unpleasant feelings then. Whether there are pleasant feelings, we'll have to check. What were you going to say something, Shanka? Or Christine, you were going to say?
Well, aren't these feelings the result of fruitional karma?
Feelings are the result, the maturation of karma, right?
And so when you're in meditative equipoise, do you have any fruitional karma happening?
Yes, from previous karma, from previous actions, right?
Yeah.
While you're in meditative equipoise, can you have that going on?
Yeah, karma still can be ripening then. Whether you have, for instance, in Tantra, when we talk about the clear light nature of the mind, realizing emptiness, usually that's associated with bliss, right? And the state of a Buddha's omniscient mind, which is always directly realizing emptiness, that is said to be experiencing bliss. But for an ordinary person who is realizing emptiness, say on the path of seeing, whether that state is blissful or not, I'm not sure, but certainly it, as time goes on, as they become higher realizers, say in the practice of Tantra, there is a practice of trying to unify the experience of bliss with the realization of emptiness, so bliss and emptiness.
Oh, okay.
So it's not exactly clear to me in the case of, maybe it says in the scriptures. I will check for you. I'm not sure in the path of seeing, when one has the first direct realization of emptiness, whether the feeling there is one of bliss or not. Anyway,
Bliss is a feeling, a pleasant feeling. We've decided that.
yeah. So when we talk about feelings, excuse me, you can talk about, when you talk about the body feelings, and remember we talked about the mental feelings and the physical feelings. So the physical feelings, usually we say pleasure, pain, or neutral. For the mental, you could call happy or blissful. It's still the same word, but you know, when you say you have when you have a pleasant feeling in the mind, you say, I'm happy, right? When you have unpleasant feeling of the mind, you say, I'm unhappy, generally, right? So the different ways of translating it in those different.
So Venerable, I'm not sure if this is how this plays into, but I mean, you don't have to be in meditative equipoise to feel bliss. I mean, you can be at the high levels of Shine, for example, and get the bliss, right? But that's not the same bliss we're talking about here, right? I mean,
right. You can have when you develop single-pointed concentration, when you develop tranquil abiding, there is a what do we call it? We call it bliss.
They seem to call it bliss.
Pliancy, pliancy, the bliss of pliancy and the bliss of the mind,
right,
through that. But when you're in direct realization of emptiness, I'm not sure that you're experiencing that blissful feeling at that time. I'll check for you. You can check other sources. So here, another qualm, another doubt.
Oh, but I still have one question. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
So let's say I'm in meditative equipoise. I hope to be one day, maybe in a few thousand lives from now. But nevertheless, if I'm in meditative equipoise and a fly bites me, right, because that's a fruition of previous karma, I won't have a negative, I won't have an unpleasant feeling arise, right? I won't have a pleasant feeling arise either, I would expect. I don't know. So that would be a neutral feeling that would arise. The bite that I must feel the bite on my skin.
No, you didn't, because when you're in meditative equipoise.
Oh, I see. You have separated from the sense consciousnesses. That's true.
You're even in the sutra system. You're oblivious. Like this example, when you have Shine, say, even a brick wall that falls down in front of you, you remain you don't hear it. Even though your body may shake, your sense consciousness has been retreated away from the faculty. Remember the three factors that are necessary for a conscious event. There has to be the faculty, the object, and the consciousness that has entered into that faculty. We're going to be talking about soon when we talk about the mental factor contact. If that consciousness is retreated away, like at the time of sleep, the consciousness retreats away from the eye faculty. So even as your brother or sister opens your eye, or your boyfriend or girlfriend opens your eye, and they do something, you don't see anything, and you don't feel anything. When you're in there, if your body is agitated enough, maybe the consciousness enters into that again, and then you would see that. Okay, but in meditative ways, those sense consciousnesses have maybe not absorbed completely to the heart chakra, but retreated away from them so that they are not present at the faculties.
Okay.
So then on page, about the middle of page 19 was another column here. Well then, if one were to explain the above mentioned non-materialistic suffering feeling, how can a suffering feeling be present in those who possess the exalted wisdom directly realizing selflessness? Those who possess the exalted wisdom directly realizing self. So that doesn't mean they're in meditative equipoise. It means they have realized that and they have that wisdom. So in post-meditation, when you arise from that state, you can still, phenomena still appear to you as being truly existent, but your mental consciousness has the sense of illusion-like meditation on emptiness. It says, oh man, this is amazing. It, looks so real, but I know it's not. It's like seeing, Shanka coming down the stairs dressed as Santa Claus. Looks just like Santa Claus, but I know it's Shanka. There are many such cases. For example, in the scripture on discipline, the Vinaya Agama, it says that even foe destroyers, arhats, so arhats have eliminated all of the delusions, all of the afflictions from their mind, right? They've realized emptiness sequentially as Arya beings. When they've eliminated all of the afflictions from their minds so that they will never return, they're called arhats or foe destroyers. Even arhats who have abandoned the conception of a self, they experience suffering feelings such as headaches due to the fruition of past actions. So there are many examples in the scriptures when, I think I mentioned in one of the other courses, when Mahamoggallana, one of the Shakyamuni Buddha's two disciples, right? When he was, he had given some teachings to some non-Buddhists and criticized the founder of these followers of a non-Buddhist. Maybe they were Jains or Nigrantas or something. And later they came and they beat him up. And so like he was like in the movies, like John Wick or something like that, completely busted up on the ground and needing all sorts of medical care. And he experienced suffering, but there was no mental reaction to that. So, and the example I gave of the Buddha when he feigned having a fever, from the Hinayana point of view, the Buddha was just an ordinary arhat, so he could have those sufferings. From a Mahayana point of view, the Buddha never has any sufferings at all, only experiences bliss. But while he was fever, people putting compresses on his head, and he said, they said, how do you feel? He said, there are great waves of pain coursing through the Buddha's body, but his mind is at ease. Remember, I mentioned that before. So from a Mahayana point of view, he was pretending. From a Hinayana point of view, he, as an arhat, he would have had those kind of feelings, but his mind was not perturbed at all. Shanka, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to say, it kind of reminds me of when Rinpoche had his stroke, Oh,
I don't remember. What happened?
Well, I mean, they had, when Rinpoche had a stroke and he was in the hospital in Australia, right? And he was in pain, and the nurses and the doctors were, all around him, and they were, I read was it Venerable Roger or somebody? There was, at the time, this was, I can't remember now, 7 years ago, I guess, 10 years ago. And there was a little thing they had sent out to students, and Venerable and Rinpoche was just doing his prayers and smiling, and it's as if he had no pain. Well, he probably didn't, but I mean, he wasn't suffering in his mind.
When one has reached that kind of understanding, when even if one hasn't become an arhat from the Mahayana point of view, even if one is not on the eighth bhumi, one has eliminated most of that ego grasping and self grasping, and one is not affected in the same way as when we have more grasping to the self and to the true existence of suffering. It's there, one recognizes it. Like the Buddha said, there are great waves of pain coursing through the Buddha's body, talking about himself in the third person, right? Like a king. But his mind is at ease. His mind is at rest. Okay. Furthermore, when feelings are divided by means of their supports, this was, I think we'd also talked about this last time, feeling arising from contact with the aggregation of visible form, I faculty, and I consciousness, those three that come together. So in other words, feeling of the I consciousness, feeling of the ear consciousness, when there's an aggregation, a coming together of a sound on the ear sense power, and the ear consciousness is present. If the ear consciousness is not present, like in meditative equipoise, it's retreated away from there, there's not going to be an ear feeling, and so forth. Even, like I said, even if the wall falls in front of someone who's in meditative equipoise, say has developed tranquil abiding, even their body shakes because the wall has fallen or the sound is loud, they are oblivious of that. Their mind is concentrated. There's feeling of the nose due to the aggregation of odor, sense power, and nose consciousness, and so forth. I won't go through each of them. They're all similar. Further, these six are each divided into three: pleasant, suffering, and neutral, giving 18 types of feeling. So you can have pleasant feeling of I consciousness, neutral, suffering feeling of I consciousness, which, like I say, is very difficult to notice. Ear consciousness. When you get to the nose, it becomes more obvious. The tongue and the body becomes more. And of course, the mental consciousness, the sixth one, feeling arisen from contact with the aggregation of a phenomenon, a mental sense power, and a mental consciousness. They can be of those three kinds of feelings. Moreover, when feelings are divided by way of objects of abandonment and antidote, there are two: feelings that support adherence and feelings that support deliverance. What is this talking about? So the big top of page 20, feelings that support adherence are feelings that are concomitant with craving for the attributes of the desire realm. What does that mean? Barbara, do you have any idea what that means? Feelings, what does it say? Feelings concomitant with craving for the attributes of the desire realm.
Feelings of something you want. That would, to me, that just sounds like what you want.
Well, the desire, here the thing is the desire realm. So when you're developing the form and formless absorptions, right? Right now we're in the desire realm. Our body is in the desire realm. Our mind is in the desire realm. Our mind is a mind of the desire realm. So our mental activities, we have grasping for or adherence, strong grasping to the attributes of the desire realm. When you're if you elevate your mind through developing tranquil abiding and you achieve the first form concentration, your body is still in the desire, is a body of the desire realm, but your mind is a mind of the first concentration of the form realm, right? So it has separated itself from craving for the attributes of the desire realm. It no longer has desire for chocolate or coffee or pizza or, sexual pleasures or other kinds of things like this that are attributes of the desire realm. One has separated oneself from them through developing what's called mundane vipassana, right? You look at the defects of the attributes of the desire realm and the advantages of the attributes of the form realm, and in so doing, you subdue your attachment to the desire realm, and you enter into the mental state of the first form concentration.
It sounds like to me in that state, you would not on purpose, but accidentally develop attachments to a higher realm. In other words.
Oh yeah. There are attachments to the bliss of the first concentration. As you go among the concentrations, the feelings become more neutral, and it's considered to be the bliss of the first concentration is considered to be a defect when you want to develop the second concentration and the third concentration. So you can develop pride, you can develop attachment in the form realm. You're not free of the delusions. In fact, even you go into the formless realm, there's still some kind of subtle kind of attachments until you reach the highest of the state of samsara. It's called the peak of samsara. In that, you have a neutral feeling, or in the peak of samsara, you have almost no recognizable feelings at all. It's called nothing at all. But you still have the imprint of the delusions, and they can arise again once you lose that concentration. Louis, you have a thought.
Just have a question. This is much more intense and significant than just mere renunciation.
What is?
This detachment that you're talking about, having turned away from the attachment of the attributes of the desire realm. This is a much more intense form of renunciation. Or is this what renunciation really is?
Not necessarily. Renunciation is a state of mind where you have recognized that all of samsara, even the form and formless absorptions, are of the nature of suffering, and you are aiming for liberation. If you talk about, of the three principles of the path, renunciation, bodhicitta, and right view, here, when you're developing, even non-Buddhists develop tranquil abiding, and they use this supramundane process to look at the defects of the desire realm, the advantages of the form realm. It's a kind of renunciation, but it's not the renunciation of what we mean in the three principles of the path. It's a mind, it's a mind that sees the defects of one and the advantages of the other, which is still contaminated. It's still, the form and formless absorptions. Feelings that support deliverance are, for example, feelings that are concomitant with a mental consciousness that, having turned away from attachment to the attributes of the desire realm, is included within the actual first concentration. Does that make sense now? Those words, yeah. Such a twofold division of feelings is taught in order to make known that the manner in which craving is induced through the force of feeling and the manner in which one can be free of attachment to feeling independence on actual concentration. So generally, when we talk about feelings, mental and physical feelings that are contaminated, that are materialistic, we could say here, or fleshy, they are the cause of attachment. We want to continue having the pleasant feeling. They are the cause of angered repulsion. wanting to be free of what's unpleasant, what's suffering, and it's the cause of the continuation of, in Tibetan we say timug or moha, which is kind of like the general kind of ignorance. It's just sort of like, I'm here, you know, you don't recognize that neutral feeling is of the nature of all pervasive suffering. Therefore, if you wish to understand these modes precisely, you should carefully consult the upper and lower Abhidharmas, the Abhidharma Samuccaya and the Abhidharma Kosha. Also, one should learn from the stages of the path to enlightenment how not to let the three, pleasant, suffering, and neutral feelings, become causes of the three poisons. How can you do that? What do you think? Ida, what do you think? How can you prevent pleasurable feelings from being, what did we just say here? The cause of attachment?
Well, your intention, I think the intention behind those feelings will make them virtuous or non-virtuous.
Well, let's say you have a pleasant feeling, you eat a nice piece of chocolate or have a cup of mocha. What's it called? Mocha coffee? What is it called? Mocha? Chocolate and coffee. And there's pleasant feeling. How can you prevent that pleasant feeling from giving rise to attachment?
Well, by not desiring it again, you know, just enjoying the moment, and that's it, you know. That's it.
Yeah. What do you think, Christine?
You can apply the antidote.
Yeah, you can recognize that this feeling is is not eternal, that it's impermanent, that it's the nature of suffering. It's just the replacing of one suffering with another, and so forth. And apply the antidotes so that you can be in that state of just, as Ida was saying, just being in the moment and experiencing it. Just experiencing pleasure doesn't necessarily, as Doris has another gulp of mocha there, just experiencing pleasure doesn't mean that you are attached to it, right? It doesn't have to give rise to attachment, but for most of us, there will be some. If you eat something that's unpleasant, you want toss it out of your mouth, even if it might have been healthy. You know, like kids with broccoli and what was the thing that you didn't like, as a spinach or something like that, as a kid. Even if it's healthy for you, because it's unpleasant, you know, there's repulsion. You want to get rid. You want to be separated from it. Stephen, you have some comments and thought?
Yeah, thank you, Venerable George. So the past few days, I've had the occasion to think about this. And one thing that occurred to me is that, you know, pleasant feelings are the fruition of virtuous karma. And so that kind of makes me want to generate more virtuous karma so that I'll have the fruition. That's a small scope.
Right.
Motivation, and I recognize that.
Yeah, it's a good start. Yeah. So from
start.
the person of beginning scope, they want to be able to have in the future a continuation of pleasure in the desire realm, or let's say in the desire God, you know, to be born as one of the desire gods, having beautiful companions and wonderful food and whatever you wish immediately appears before you. But from the point of view of a person of intermediate scope, who sees the disadvantages of that they are not long lasting, you start to feel some hesitancy, and you start to recognize that having all these, experiencing the pleasures now, is diminishing your store of virtuous karma, which could be used for realizations. It might become the substantial cause of making realizations. So the Kadampa Geshis were happy when they heard abuse and they experienced suffering because they saw it as the diminishing of their negative karma. And they were a little bit uneasy when people would praise them because they would see that as the diminishing of their store of virtue and so forth. And obviously, when you hear those pleasant words, it can become the cause of attachment and losing your spiritual insights and so forth. Okay, so now the next of the omnipresent mental factors, douche, discrimination, sometimes some texts translated as perception or discernment, discrimination, discernment. Regarding the entity of discrimination, the Abhidhamma Samuccaya, that's the compendium of Abhidharma, says, what is the defining characteristic of discrimination? As she says here, literally it means aggregation knowing. Dupa means to pull together, comprise, or to aggregate. Shepa means knowing, like we learned in Lorik. Response, it has the characteristic of knowing upon aggregation. It has the entity of apprehending the sign and apprehending the mark, through which one designates an expression to objects of perceptions, hearing, differentiation, and knowledge. One designates an expression to objects of perception, objects of hearing, objects of differentiation, and objects of knowledge. Just as it's been said above, it is a knower that upon aggregation of the three. So when you talk about douche, the dupa means aggregation. What does it mean, aggregation? That means the coming together of the object, the faculty, the sense power, and the primary consciousness. Okay. When we talk about the mental factor contact is that which causes that the sense power to be able to be a proper receptacle for the consciousness to enter into it. So just as has been said above, it is a knower. So douche is consciousness, is a knower, that upon aggregation of the three apprehends the uncommon sign of an object. The uncommon, or you could instead of saying uncommon, you could say the specific sign of an object. Okay, so for instance, in eye consciousness and mental consciousness, or say in the five senses, sense consciousnesses, as opposed to the mental consciousness, the action of discrimination can be a little bit different. In eye consciousness, discrimination is that factor, that mental factor that is able to discriminate the perceptual field. Say, for instance, I'm looking out the window, there's some leaves that have already started to turn red and yellow, some that are green. Without discrimination, without that ability to discriminate one thing from another, it would look just like a homogeneous field. So in the sense consciousnesses, it acts more like that. In the mental consciousness, it can discriminate between things in a more subtle way, apprehending the sign and apprehending the mark. So in this text by Vasubandhu, the Five Aggregates, it says, what is discrimination? It apprehends the sign of an object. When discrimination is divided, there are two: the apprehension of a sign and the apprehension of a mark. So what is this talking about here? So the apprehension of a sign is the apprehension of an uncommon or specific sign of an object which appears to a non-conceptual consciousness. So, seeing shape or color by the eye consciousness and so forth. The apprehension of a mark as opposed to a sign is the apprehension of an uncommon or specific sign of an object which appears to conceptual thought. So discrimination in the mental consciousness, which is generally conceptual, it does have non-conceptual, which would fall into the first category, but for a conceptual thought, discrimination can discriminate one thing from another conceptually, which is much different than its action in the sense consciousnesses. The bases of engagement for these two types of discrimination are perceptions, hearing, differentiation, and knowledge. So what does that mean? Perceptions involving designating an expression to objects manifestly perceived. The basis of engagement of these two types of discrimination are perceptions, hearing, differentiation, and knowledge. Their meanings are as follows. Perceptions involving designating an expression to objects manifestly perceived. What does that mean, manifestly perceived? Stephen, do you know?
I think here it just means something that's obvious. We would use the word pramana in our tenets course. Am I right here?
Or I would say
we would say direct, yeah, we would say direct, manifest or directly perceived. Hearing, differentiation, knowledge. Hearing involves designating an expression in dependence on hearing credible words. Designating an expression in dependence on hearing credible words. What did we talk about here? What did we talk about? Apprehension. So it's designating an expression. Differentiation involves designating an expression to objects ascertained in dependence on signs. Knowledge involves designating an expression to objects ascertained directly. Let me see in Geshe Rapton's book when we talk about these, if it actually has a mention of this. What do we talk about? Sign. No, it doesn't mention that here. In Jeffrey Hopkins. Here, I'll say here, there's also a division into two types: discrimination, apprehending signs and objects; apprehension individually differentiating the features of an object, such as blue, yellow, and so forth. So that would be in perception. Discrimination, apprehending signs in expressions. Apprehension individually differentiating the features of expressions, such as in, this is a man, that is a woman. So that would be conceptual, right? Okay, so we'll come back to that next time, but let's go on a little bit further. The Abhidharma Kosha explains discrimination as being twofold: apprehension of a sign with regard to an object and apprehension of a sign with regard to a convention. The apprehension of a sign with regard to an object means to apprehend it through individually distinguishing the object's particularities, such as blue, yellow, and so forth, which is what Jeffrey Hopkins was just talking about here. The apprehension of a sign with regard to a convention means to apprehend it through individually distinguishing the convention's particularities as one thinks this is a man, that is a woman. When discrimination is differentiated in terms of its support, there are 6. So that's supported on the sense powers and so forth of the 6 senses. When discrimination is differentiated in terms of its objects of observation, there are 6. So here there's a little bit of debate. Here he translates, CG translates, in accordance with Jeffrey Hopkins, reasoned discrimination, unreasoned discrimination, discrimination of the small, the vast, the limitless, and discrimination thinking there is nothing, or discrimination of nothingness. So the first 2 are a little bit debatable here. Reasoned discrimination is of 3 types. She's following Jeffrey Hopkins' translation. Discrimination skilled in the relationship between names and objects. Discrimination observing the compounded as impermanent and so forth. The word as is not in the text. Jeffrey Hopkins doesn't have it in parentheses, but she has it in parentheses. Discrimination having a clear object of observation and subjective aspect. When we say discrimination skilled in the relationship between names and objects, saying that is a fan, that is a heater, that is an iPad or something like that, that discriminates between the name and the object. Here she has unreasoned discrimination is also threefold. It is the 3 kinds, its 3 kinds are the opposites of the 3 types of reasoned discrimination mentioned above. That follows with what Jeffrey Hopkins says. But in Geshe Rapton's teachings, has a very different interpretation of these first 2. So animita is the term here. Nimitta means sign. Animita means non-sign. So Jeffrey Hopkins and CG following him call the first one reasoned, whereas the word sign doesn't always have to do with reasoning. Remember when we talked about a correct reason, or correct syllogism, correct sign? Generally, the word nimitta doesn't mean that kind of reason. Nimitta means just the sign of something. So here, Geshe Rapton says, discernment with a sign, rather than saying reasoned discrimination or reasoned discernment. The kind of discrimination or discernment is of 3 types. That which is skilled in relating terms to their corresponding objects, that discriminates, that is a fan, that is a picture, and so forth. That which discerns concrete, impermanent phenomena. So in other words, he's not putting the word as in between. Here it's saying discrimination, observing the compounded as being impermanent. Geshe Rapton, who is well skilled in debating these subjects and so forth, and in the literature, doesn't take it to mean that at all. He says that which discerns compounded impermanent phenomena, not saying compounded phenomena as impermanent. And that which has a clear, distinct referent. Okay, that much more or less the same, but discrimination without a sign, which is here said unreasoned discrimination, takes it quite different. This is also of three types, being the opposite of the three mentioned above. The first is without a sign. The first type of that is the opposite of that which is skilled in relating terms to their corresponding objects. Here is the discernment of a young child who, having not yet learned a language, does not identify objects with signs. In other words, names and terms. So that without a sign, instead of saying unreasoned, in Tibetan and in Sanskrit, it's not talking about reasoning signs, the signs of a reason. It's talking about the different kind of meaning of sign. This is the discernment of a young child who has not yet learned a language, does not identify objects with signs, in other words, names and terms. The second, which here it says, discrimination, observing the compounded as impermanent and so forth. Here it says, the second is the discrimination or discernment of a meditative perception of ultimate truth in which there is no sign of any conventional phenomena. So CG, in translating this text, is following almost word by word Jeffrey Hopkins' translation in his meditation on emptiness, which is more literal, but maybe not the intention of the author. Geshe Rapton, I think, is more talking about having studied this in more detail from other texts. So the second, discernment without a sign, is the discernment of a meditative perception of ultimate truth in which there is no sign of any conditioned phenomena. Conditioned phenomena means what? Conventional phenomena. The third, which is the opposite of that which has a clear, distinct referent, is the discernment of the formless absorption at the peak of samsara, in which there is no sign of a clear or distinct referent. So without disparaging Jeffrey Hopkins, I think Geshe Rapton's explanation of this is more compelling. He doesn't give, neither of them give the sources for their interpretation. It looks like that Jeffrey Hopkins and CG following him are just taking the literal meaning of this without having heard commentary on it. So the rest of them are more or less the same. Discrimination of the small. What does that mean? Discrimination in the continuum of an ordinary being of the desire realm who has not obtained an actual concentration, and discrimination observing the attributes of the desire realm. That's called discrimination of the small. Discrimination of the vast refers to discrimination observing the form realm and discriminations in the continua of form realm beings. So once you've, if you've attained a first concentration, your body is of the desire realm, but your mind is of the first concentration. That kind of discrimination is called discrimination of the vast. But also, if you are born in the form realm, as a result of having developed the concentration, you create what's called immovable karma, or what did Stephen refer to it last time? What did you call it? You had another
Static.
Static. Yeah, that means that that particular karma can only ripen when you develop the first concentration, preparation of the first concentration, can only ripen in rebirth in the form realm. It can't ripen as some other pleasure somewhere else or something. So once you're born in the form realm, you automatically have that discrimination of the vast because you have a form realm mind. Discrimination of the limitless refers to discriminations observing the source of infinite space and the source of infinite consciousness. So what does this mean? In the formless realm, there are 4 levels of the formless realm, right? Does anyone know what those 4 levels are? Doris, do you know? What are they?
I'm just going to look at the text here because it says infinite space, infinite consciousness, and nothingness. I'm going to take the clue from those 4, 5, and 6, but I can't remember the name of
Okay.
those aren't the names.
Okay, so
And then there's the 4th one. Yeah.
right. So in the formless realm, one has separated from the form realm through further analysis, and one thinks, first of all, what does it say here? Everything is space. There is nothing but space. As a result of that kind of meditation, one achieves the first formless absorption, which is called infinite space. So when it says here in number 5, it says, discrimination of the limitless refers to discriminations observing the source or the keche, the ayatana of infinite space. That means it's observing infinite space. That's a phenomena, right? Infinite space. And in the second of the formless absorptions, it's called infinite consciousness. You think there's no, beyond just everything is just space, everything is just consciousness. So what you're observing is just infinite consciousness, all pervading consciousness. Those 2 are called discrimination of the limitless because they're, let's say, infinite, limitless. The 6th one, discrimination of nothingness, refers to the discrimination observing the source of nothingness. So that's the 3rd of the formless absorptions. In that, one has gone beyond thinking that there's nothing but space, nothing but consciousness, that there's nothing at all. In that 3rd formless absorption, you are observing just infinite nothingness, nothing. The 4th formless absorption is called what? What, Stephen?
No.
I think it's called with discrimination and not without discrimination. That's kind of a funny name.
Right. So here, the reason there's not a seventh one here of the fourth absorption, sometimes called the peak of cyclic existence, you have no gross discrimination. So there's no discrimination that's being referred to here, but it's not as though you have no discrimination at all. You still have a subtle kind of discrimination. That's why it's called with discrimination, but not without discrimination. It means without gross discrimination, which is what's being referred to here, but still some kind of subtle discrimination. In the same way, you could say that the formless being has no gross form, but they're not without no form at all. They have a subtle kind of form from the point of view of Tantra. They still have the subtle wind, which acts as the support of them. So here the text, the words in the first two here, reasoned discrimination and unreasoned, it almost sounds like there's like reasoning involved, but it's not talking about reasoning. It's talking about signs, as Geshe Rapton said, that which is skilled in relating terms to their corresponding objects, that which discerns or discriminates concrete impermanent phenomena, and that which has a clear, distinct referent. And the opposites of those being, for instance, the discernment of a young child, discrimination of a young child who has not yet learned the language, does not identify objects with the signs of names and so forth, names and terms. The second is the discernment or discrimination of the meditative perception of ultimate truth, in which there is no sign of any conditioned phenomena. And the third is the discrimination of the formless absorption at the peak of samsara, in which there is no sign, no gross sign of a clear or distinct referent. That's why it's called, what did we say here? The peak of samsara, not with discrimination, not without discrimination. So I'm going to end here. Next time we're going to start talking about intention, attention, and contact. Any last questions before we end? Come on, you got something. Okay, Nadine has something. What do you think?
This absorption, can you hear me? This absorption, nothing at all. What is the difference to nihilism? Is it related to some understanding of emptiness? Because they do not deny karma and effects, do they?
Well, it depends. One's philosophical, even the non-Buddhist, some we could call Hindu, let's say Vedic schools, actually could achieve these various absorptions of the formless realm. In fact, they would consider the fourth formless absorption, which is called the peak of samsara, or as Stephen said, not with discrimination, not without discrimination. They would consider that to be nirvana or moksha, some of the Hindu schools. So they would have different philosophical reasons for aiming to these things. From a Buddhist perspective, the bodhisattvas do not necessarily have to develop these formless absorptions, but they generally do. The reason being not because they see that as the nature of reality, but these are states of mind that can be achieved, that are becoming subtler and subtler. And they use them to train their mind. Let's say they enter into the peak of samsara, where there's no discrimination. And from there, they jump down to the first of the formless absorptions in an instant. At first, it takes a long time to extricate oneself from that concentration and then to fall to the right place. But after a time, they can do it in the time of a finger snap. And they do all kinds of jumping in between these states to make their minds more agile and to create the ability then to enter into absorption on emptiness, and then to exit that in an instant and to apprehend conventional phenomena. Say up until the 10th bhumi, including the 10th bhumi, you can't have a simultaneous perception of conventional and ultimate reality, right? It always has to alternate. So the very skillful bodhisattvas can exit the meditative equipoise on emptiness and, say maybe their eyes are open. They in an instant they can exit the meditation, direct realization of emptiness, and see the relative phenomena again, and then go back into that emptiness in an instant. The way that they train to do that is by training in the form and formless absorptions, jumping from one to another. So they don't enter into those the formless absorptions generally to meditate on emptiness. They can enter into the first form of the form absorptions, the form realm. They can enter into those as means to meditate on emptiness. But because the discrimination becomes less and less as one goes into the formless absorptions, it's not a good place to meditate on emptiness. In fact, many of the bodhisattvas either rely on a preparation to the first form concentration to meditate on emptiness. They don't even enter into the actual concentration to meditate on emptiness. So there's a friend of mine in Australia, a monk. Maybe some of you have heard of him. I can't remember his name now. He was also a physicist, and he has a monastery outside of outside of Melbourne, I think I visited. And he has a monastery outside where the monks, he says, they train in the, maybe iPhone Dawn. Do you know who I'm talking about? Oh, okay. I thought you had come on because you knew who I was talking about. Brahmacharya is his name, and they call him Achan Brahm. So actually Australian, not a how do you say, a Theravada, not a Thai or something like that. He's a Caucasian guy from England. So he said his monks meditate on the form absorptions as a means to enhance their renunciation. It's sort of like, from a certain point of view in the Hinayana, the form absorptions are cultivated by the monks because at that point you're separated from attachment to the desire realm. So when you get too caught up in the world, you've heard too much Fox News or MSNBC or something like that, and you need a break, you meditate you go into the absorption and the form absorptions. Also to overcome lust, desire for food and a companionship of the opposite sex and so forth and so on. And in the first of those formless absorptions, there is a kind of bliss. And in the second, there's a kind of joy. When you get to the third and fourth of those absorptions, there's just more or less neutral feelings. So they would use that kind of as their retreat, to get away from the things of the desire realm.
So Venerable, so the absorption, the form and formless realm, those are the jhanas you're talking about, right? They call it the jhanas,
Yeah.
or the jhanas in Sanskrit, right?
Yeah,
So
they're actually in Sanskrit, it's dhyana.
dhyana, and they call it jhana, right?
Yeah, because in Sanskrit, the syllable, the DH of dhyana, DHY, right? DH is one letter in Sanskrit. It's
Right.
the aspirated D. Ka. Followed by Y. There in Pali, there are no differing conjunct consonants. So you can't have two different consonants together. Instead of saying karma, they say kama. So they double the M rather than having RM. DHARMA, they have DHAMMA. So in dhyana, they even changed the DH to ja, to just J. The DHY, they changed to J. So it's jhana. So it's the same, it means the exact same thing, except if you're not familiar with the difference between Pali and Sanskrit, you might think they're two different words. Jhana is not Sanskrit, it's Pali equivalent of dhyana, okay? But that was not your question. Your question was something else?
Well, no, I was just clarifying in my mind. In my mind, my understanding is that the dhyanas or the jhanas are the same as the absorptions of the form and formless realms. Is that correct?
Generally, yes, that's correct. Sometimes they may limit the word jhana to mean the form realm and not the formless realm. But in general, they're all dhyanas. They're all meditative concentrations. Anyone else? Okay, so thank you for your patience. Let's end with a very brief dedication of merits. Okay. Relax your mind. Remember that we've created virtuous karma this morning, that karma will ripen in cyclic existence, sometimes in ways that we don't wish, that might be pleasant, but not useful to our spiritual endeavors. But if we dedicate it, we can sort of, like the reins of a horse, we can direct it in the way we want, to dedicate the merits with a strong wish that they ripen in such a way that they bring about our eventual achievement of enlightenment through the process of making the realizations on the path. Due to these merits, may I quickly become a Buddha for the sake of leading each and every sentient being into that very same state. Thank you very much.